Hey all, and welcome to yet another Programming the Net tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at JavaScript. We're going to make our first steps in programming JavaScript, and we're going to learn how to manipulate the HTML and CSS that we've been covering so far programmatically from within JavaScript. And really quickly, before we get into writing any code, JavaScript, as you probably already know, is a programming language. And it's a programming language quite similar to other programming languages, right? Like C or C++ or Java or Scala or any other ones that you might have heard of. And it can do pretty much anything that those other programming languages can do. The reason it's interesting for us, it's because it also happens to be the programming language that is used within the browser, right? And the web is built with it and kind of around it, and it has a really good interface for programmatically manipulating HTML and CSS. Yeah, we're going to get into it. Over here I have a new glitch project. Let me just rename it to btn5, and I've removed, as usual, the files that we don't need, which is have the index.html with an HTML tag and the head and the body tag inside of it. And in order to use JavaScript in our web pages, there are a few ways. They're sort of similar to how we use CSS inside of our web pages, right? One way is to use the script tag. I mean, all of these ways include the script tag. The first one is to add the script tag inside of the head and write our JavaScript code inside of the script tag. However, we're not going to be using this one for the same reason that we choose to write our CSS in a different file, just for organization purposes. We're going to do the same with JavaScript. And in order to do that, all we need to do is to still use the script tag and make sure to close it and give it a source, right? So script source equals /script.js. Oh, maybe it doesn't even need to be closed. Or maybe it does. There we go. All right, so remember to close the script tag. And now we need to create a file, script.js, inside of our folder hierarchy, right? So this is very similar to CSS. I'm going to create the file script.js. And right now we have a page that technically includes a script. The script doesn't have anything inside quite yet, right? So nothing is going to happen. And the first function we're going to look at is the alert function. This is a really simple function that's useful in sort of debugging your web pages or in kind of giving the user a message. You've definitely seen it around the internet. It's just called alert. Oops. And you have to open and close a pair of parentheses, and we already see the alert, right? There's no message inside of it, but if we give it a message, this is an alert, it's a bit annoying, right? So we see this is an alert, and then the browsers usually include this, prevent this page from creating additional dialogues. But it's one sort of like rudimentary way of communicating something to the user, or also one way for you to help debug your code or print messages throughout the course of your web page. Yeah, that's it for the alert. Just like keep it in mind. We might use it very often, or you might not. It's just good to be aware of it. I'm going to comment it out for now because it tends to become a little bit annoying. And the next function we're going to talk about, and this, I use this all the time. It's a utility function. It's not something that will make your web page, but it's something that you will use often, again, to debug or to see what's going on in the code. And that involves printing to the console, right? So the function is called console.log, and it works in a similar way with alert, in that you have to use a pair of parentheses that denotes the fact that it's a function that we're calling. And it takes the argument of the message that you want to print to the console, right? So this is a message. We don't see it anywhere on the web page because just gets printed to the console. So in order to see that, we need to open up our inspect element. Oh, let me rearrange things a little bit here. We'll make the page small just because there's nothing on it. And if we go into our console, what we're going to be able to see our message. This is a message. Ignore most of the other stuff around here. It's various warnings coming from glitch itself or some of the requests that are being made. Maybe you won't even see some of these. But yeah, this is console.log. Super helpful. We're going to be using it consistently throughout the tutorials. All right, so the next thing that we are going to talk about are variables. And a variable is a container for a certain type of data. That certain type of data can be a number, that certain type of data can be a word or a string, as they call it in programming. It can be an array, which is a collection of items, or it can be an object, which is a different type of collection that we're also going to get into. The way to declare a variable in JavaScript is by using the var keyword. So we're going to say var and then the name of the variable. Let's just call it number variable equals 5. Right, so now we have this variable whose value is 5. So if we were to print it to the console, we would just say console.log number variable, and we're going to see it show up inside of our console. As you've probably seen in other programming languages that you might be familiar with, it's really easy to do math operations with these, right? So if we print number variable plus 3, we're going to get 8, or times 3, we're going to get 15. You can raise to the power by hitting the star sign twice, right? So that's number variable to the power of 3, which we see in the console as being 125. Division, right? So like all of that is on the table. We can also multiply variables between themselves, right? So number variable times number variable, number variable is going to give us a 25. Or we can assign the result of this operation to a new variable and then print that new variable, right? So if we say var squared number equals number variable times number variable, let me just reorganize this a little bit, and then print squared number, we're going to be able to see the result in here. Right, so these are number variables. Let's take a look at a slightly different type of variable, which are string variables. If you've done any kind of C or C++ before, you know that variables have types, right? You need to declare it using the int keyword for numbers or long, and the char or string for strings. JavaScript doesn't require that. In JavaScript, all variables are declared using the var keyword, and then it's the compiler itself that kind of figures out whether it's a number or a string or something else, and does some magic in the back on behalf of us, which is one reason that JavaScript is probably a little bit easier to learn than other programming languages. It's just higher level from this perspective. So string variable equals, this is a string, right? So notice we have to put the message in between quotes in order to specify a string. Let's print it to the console too, and then we can see what happens if we remove the quotes. String variable. Right, so we see our message over here. This is a string. Maybe I should zoom in on the console a little bit so it's a little more visible. Okay, great. If we were to remove the quotes, we will get a compilation error, right? Because JavaScript is going to try understanding this piece of text as a collection of other variables or operations that can be done, right? And there's nothing that's called this or is in this program. So yeah, that's the general rule of strings. They need to exist between quotes. You can apply operations to strings as well, right? So if we wanted to say print this is a string twice, we could create a new variable. Let's call it var twice the string equals string variable. Oops, variable. Why is this word so hard to type? Plus string variable, right? And if we were to print twice the string instead, we see our twice the string variable being printed, which is exactly our string repeated twice. Also, if we wanted to add, let's say, a space or a dash in between those, it's really easy to add another string in here. So it's going to be string variable plus a dash plus string variable again. Right, so we see our dash showing up in here. String manipulation is really easy with JavaScript. It's significantly easier than with C, and that's a good thing. The one other thing I wanted to show about strings, we can look at the length of a string, right? So how many characters there are in it by using variable.length. So if we were to print string, let's say twice the string dot length, we would see the number 33 show up in here, which should be the length of the string we just printed. Let's also print the length of the original one, right? So the length of the original one should be 33 minus 1 minus the dash 32 divided by 216. So if we print string variable dot length and then separate it with a comma from the other variable, we're able to print basically multiple variables from within the same console log statement. Yeah, I think that's it with strings for now. We're going to get more into them later and as we need them. And the next thing that I'm going to talk about are arrays. And as you've seen, numbers and strings store one piece of information, right? Like either a number or a message or anything like that. Arrays are entities which allow us to store lists, basically, right? Like a collection of items within the same place. And they also use the keyword var, and we'll just say var array variable equals. And then the syntax for declaring an array is we have to open and close the square brackets, and then in between them we have to write our items separated by a comma, right? So we can have an array that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, right? This is an array that contains 5 elements. All of the elements are numbers. And let's just print the array variable for now. So let's say console.log, and I'll start with a string and say our array is, and then a comma, and then print our array variable. Right, so we see our message, our array is, and then the console tells us that the variable we just printed is an array with the respective items inside of it. We can click on the little arrow and it would like show us a more detailed view of this array. Similarly to the string, we can take a look at the length of the array by calling array variable.length, right? So I'll do console.log the length of our array is, and then array variable.length. Right, so it's telling us that the length of our array is 5. If we add another element, it should tell us that the length is 6. We can also access individual elements in the array, right? So if we wanted to access the first element in our array, I'll just print the message, the first element of our array is. And then accessing an element works again with the square brackets. You have to type the name of the array, which is array variable, and then open and close square brackets, and then the index of the element inside. The first element is going to be at index 0. Right, so we see that the first element of our array is 1. Indexing in JavaScript works from 0, right? So the first element has index 0, the next one has index 1, and so on. Right, so the second element is going to be array of 1. We see that's 2. The fourth element is going to be array of 3, and that should be the number 4. And then the sixth element should be index 5, which is the number 9. I know this is a little bit confusing, but as you start working with them more, it's going to become really, really intuitive. Yeah, so these are some of the things that can be done with an array, right? We can declare an array and like initialize it with a few elements. We can find out the length of our array, and we can access individual elements within our array. We can also use variables in order to to initialize our array, right? So if instead of 2 I said number variable, and instead of 7 I said squared number, right? we see our array changing in the console log. And yeah, maybe let's show one more thing, the way to add elements to an array programmatically, right? So instead of us having to type in here the things that we want, we can just say array variable dot push, and then the new element that we want inside of our array. And I'm just going to add the number 18. Right, so we see that when we print our array, the number 18 is not showing up, and that is because we're printing the array before adding a new element to it, right? So if we were to print again, and we would say console log our updated array is, and then array variable, we would see the number 18 showing up in the array as well. All right, I think I'm going to stop here with the array, and the next thing that I want to talk about is the for loop. And I realize if you haven't seen this stuff before, this might feel like a lot of information at the same time. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions about any of these. And I know right now these are just kind of floating concepts, but as we get into manipulating HTML with JavaScript, we're going to start using parts of them or all of them, and then you're going to see how they are applied in practice as well. So a for loop is basically a mechanism to repeat certain actions without having to copy paste code. So if, for example, we wanted to create an array, let's call it var second array, and we're just going to initialize it as an empty array. If we wanted to put all of the numbers from 0 to 99 inside of this array, right? One way we could go about that would be to just say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on until we get to 99. However, that would be very time consuming for us. It's also, we're programmers, right? We can figure out a better way to do that. And it turns out the for loop is a great way to do it. The for loop can basically iterate over a selection of numbers and can repeat the same action multiple times. The way it works is like this. We say the for keyword and then open a set of parentheses. And there are three parameters that go in here. The first one is a variable, which is going to be our counter. So we're going to say var counter equals 0. The second element here is the stopping condition of our counter. right? So we want the for loop to stop after reaching the number 99, right? If we want to put the numbers from 0 to 99 inside of our array. And the third element is how the counter changes from one step to the next. And in our case, we just want to increase it by 1. So we're just going to say counter equals counter plus 1. And then we're going to have to open a set of curly brackets. And everything that goes in between these curly brackets will be executed as part of the for loop, right? So for now, let's just print a console.log message with our counter just to see, with our counter variable, just to see exactly what's happening inside of this for loop. So I'll just say console.log counter is, and then counter. Right, so we see our logs have counter is 0, counter is 1, counter is 2, and so on up until 99. If we were to increase our counter by, let's say, 2 at every step, we would only see the even numbers, right? So 0, 2, 4, 6, and so on. Right, so this is basically how for loop works. You have to initialize your counter, give it the starting value, you have to give it a stopping condition, and you have to tell it how to change from one step to the next. It can increase or it can decrease, right? We could go from 99 to 0 and decrease the counter. So let's maybe do that, and let's populate our array with the numbers from 99 to 0. Let's say start from 99, counter larger than or equal to 0. Oh, I think glitch froze. All right, let's give it a second. Oh, glitch. Maybe I can... Oh, I see what I did here. I think I just created an infinite loop accidentally. All right, we're back. I had accidentally created what's called an infinite loop, where the stopping condition never gets met, right? So I had counter starting from 99, counter being larger than or equal to 99 and increasing. So it would go 99, 100, 101, 102, and so on, forever being larger than 99, and that's called an infinite loop, right? So my page got stuck because JavaScript was just being busy increasing the counter. However, I fixed that, and now we're back. We're 99 going down to 0, and the counter is decreasing by 1 at every step. Let's show our page next to the code again, and let's open the console as well. Let's see, we want the console. Right, so we see the counter going downwards from 99 to 0. And let's add all of these elements to our array. Right, so we said we can use the push function of the array for it. So we type the name of the array, second array dot push, and then our counter. We don't see anything in the console yet because we stopped printing the counter and we're not printing the second array. So let's print our second array, console.log second array. And we see an array with a length of 100. And if we click on it, we will see all of our elements. All right, and let's do one final thing in here. Let's say we only wanted to add the numbers that are divisible by 5 into this array, right? So if we wanted to go 95, 90, 85, 80, and so on down to 0, one way to do that would be to start from our counter from 95 and go down by 5, go down by 5 at each step. The other way to do that, which is less performant, but that we're going to use for excuse me, for the purpose of this example, is by using an if statement. So an if statement allows us to sort of create a logical branch within our code. We can add conditions to our if statement and tell our code to to execute something if the condition is met and execute something else if the condition is not met. Right, so in our case, we want to check if the counter is divisible by 5. And the way to do that is by using the modulo operator, counter modulo 5. Right, so counter modulo 5 gives us the remainder of the division between counter and 5. Right, so for 6 it would be 1, for 7 it would be 2, and so on. And in order for a number to be divisible by 5, the remainder of its division by 5 needs to be 0. So we say if counter modulo 5 is equal to 0, and sort of similarly to the for loop, we have to open and close the curly brackets. And then we can have an else statement, which gets executed in the opposite scenario. Right, so we want to only add the numbers divisible by 5 to the array. Right, and right now the else branch of this statement is empty, so nothing is happening there. But if we look in our console, we see that only the numbers divisible by 5 are part of our array. And for our else statement, let's print all the other numbers to the console, right? So we can just say console.log counter is counter. All right, so now we see at the end our array with all the numbers divisible by 5. And if we go through the console log statements from within the else, we see all of the numbers except for 5, 10, 15, and all the ones divisible by 5. So that's what the if statement does, right? It allows us to create branches inside of the code and execute different pieces of code depending on certain conditions that we impose. If statements can be used outside of for loops, right? It doesn't have to be inside of the for. Yeah, I think. Oh, let's do one more thing. Let's do like a more practical example of let's say defining an array with the names of, I don't know, 10 colors that we choose, and then printing a random color at every step, or like printing a random color rather every single time that the code is being run. So I'm going to type a comment here and say print a random element of the array every time we run the code. So let's start by defining our array. So we'll say var colors equals, and then let's just give it a few of the HTML color names, right? So I'll start with red, blue, green, purple, yellow, orange, and pink. Right. For now, I'm actually going to comment out all of the previous console logs just so we have a clean console and we can see what we're doing. The way to do that in JavaScript, as you've seen me do already, is by typing 2 slashes in front of the instructions that you want to comment, and those are just not going to get executed anymore. All right, so we'll just do it for all of our console log statements. Oh, there are 2 more up here. You can also hit Command and slash or Control slash on Windows, and Glitch will comment the whole line automatically for you. All right, so we have our array of colors. Let's print them to the console. Console.log our colors and then the colors array, right? So we have 7 elements and all of that, right? And now we want to, as I was saying, print the name of a random color within the console every time the code is being executed. right? We know how to print the same color every time. If we just said console log first color is colors of 0, right? That would always print the color red. However, we need to find a way to randomize this index here so we get a new color every time. So I'm going to create a variable for that, and I'm just going to call it index equals, and I'm going to initialize it with 0 for now, right? And let's print, this is going to become our random color. Console.log, the random color is, and then colors of index, right? So we're accessing still the element at index 0 inside of our array. And now we want to change this variable to something random. JavaScript offers us a function that's called math.random. So I'm just going, oops, let me change this let into var. Let is just another way of declaring a variable. It's very similar to var. There's a subtle difference between them, but you don't need to worry about them for now. We can just use var all over the place. Let's say var random number equals math.random. Right, so math.random gives us a random number between 0 and 1. So let's print that to the console so we see exactly what happens. Random number is random number. Right, so we see it's 0.013, blah, 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 blah. If we refresh the page, we see a different random number between 0 and 1, and a different one, and a different one. Right, so we need to somehow take this number and turn it into a valid index for our array. A valid index being a number between 0 and the length of our array, which is 7. Alright, so one way to do that is the following. We know that our random number is originally between 0 and 1. If we multiply this random number by 7, which is the length of our array, we know that we would get a random number between 0 and 7, right? And then it's still going to be a floating point number, right? It's still going to have some decimal digits. So we need to get rid of those to turn it into an integer number so we can use it as an index for our array. So for the first part of that, we can do random number times 7. Right, so we're going to get the message that the random color is undefined because random number times 7 is still a floating point number. We need to turn that into an integer number, right, as I was mentioning earlier, so we can use it as an index. In order to do that, we can use another mathematical function, which is called floor, math.floor. And math.floor just takes the integer part of any number, right? So if we have 3.145, math.floor is going to give us 3. If we have 4.999, math.floor is going to give us 4. Right, so in this case, we're just taking the floor, so the highest integer number that's lower than our number, of the random number multiplied by 7, which is always going to give us a different random color, right? So we got one yellow, we got one orange, a purple, another orange, and so on. And the last thing that we should do to this piece of code, right now we multiplied it by 7 because we know that the length of our array of colors is 7. However, this array might change, right? We might decide to add another color. Oh man, I don't even know. Brown. Yes, there we go. Brown is another color. Right, so now we have 8 colors in total, but our random color only works on the first 7. So we should replace this 7 with the actual length of the array, which we can get by just calling colors.length. Right, so we see the code is still working, and right now it's going to be able to detect the length of our array of colors and randomize based on that. So if we actually removed all of the colors except for the first one, the code should still work and would always give us a red, right? If we add a blue as well, the code is going to keep alternating between red and blue. All right, I think I'm going to stop here with this tutorial. These are sort of the basic building, or like a few of the basic building blocks in JavaScript, right? So we covered number variables, some mathematical operations, string variables, arrays, which are collections of things or lists of things. We went a little bit into for loops, which are an easy way to repeat the same piece of code over and over again. And we looked into if statements, which allow us to create branches in the code and choose what to execute based on certain conditions. And the last thing that we did, we learned how to pick a random element from an array. And we're going to be using this random generator in our next tutorial in order to change the background color of a page to something different every time the user accesses it. Yeah, that's all for now. Thank you for listening.